They called them in from 5 continents, 50 engineers, 48 hours, 17 diagnostic reports, and 3 of the most expensive industrial analysis programs money could buy. The Titangent 9 sat dead on the factory floor, silent, massive, immovable, as a monument to everything Caldwell Industries stood to lose. Edward Crane paced the length of the machine with his phone pressed to his ear, jaw locked, voice low and dangerous. The investors were already in the air. Jonathan Hargrove stood at the far end of the corridor in a green custodial uniform, holding a mop handle with both hands, watching the commotion through the long window. He didn't look curious. He didn't look surprised. He looked the way a man looks when he drives past the house he used to own, and sees the new owners struggling with a door he knew had always stuck a little to the left. He watched for a moment. Then he pushed his cart forward and kept walking. Don't look away. Some stories change everything you think you know about a person in a single second. The east entrance of Caldwell Industries opened before 7 in the morning, and Jonathan Hargrove was always among the first through it. Not because he was eager, because Mia woke up early regardless of what time she went to bed. And once Mia was awake, the apartment was awake, and once the apartment was awake, there was no particular reason to stay in it. He packed her a thermos of warm oatmeal, tucked her rabbit, a faded ivory thing named Biscuit that had lost one eye the previous winter and gained a replacement button eye sewn on by Jonathan with a needle he'd borrowed from the building super into the side pocket of her backpack, and drove them both to the factory by 6:40. Mia was 6 years old and had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of going very still and very quiet when she was thinking hard about something. She carried a small spiral notebook wherever she went and drew in it constantly. Trees, cars, machines she'd seen through windows, imaginary animals with improbable numbers of legs. That morning, the daycare facility, 3 blocks from the factory, had sent a group message just after 5 a.m. A pipe had burst overnight. The building was closed until further notice. No children until Monday at the earliest. Jonathan read the message in the parking lot of a gas station with one hand on the steering wheel and Mia asleep in the back seat. He had no one to call. He carried her in through the east entrance, her head on his shoulder, Biscuit clutched to her chest. Oliver Reed was working the security desk, a broad, slow-moving man in his late 50s with the kind of face that had been kind so long it no longer knew how to be anything else. He took one look at Jonathan and Mia and pulled his own chair out from behind the desk. "She can sit here," Oliver said. "I'll keep an eye on her." "I'll owe you one," Jonathan said. "You already owe me about 40, Oliver said, and handed Mia a granola bar she accepted without fully waking up. Jonathan changed into his work uniform in the locker room, folded his street clothes into his bag, and began his first rounds of the morning. The factory floor ran in 3 shifts, and the overnight crew had left it in reasonable condition. A few scattered coffee cups near the pressure monitoring station, a smear of hydraulic fluid near Bay 7 that someone had walked through and tracked toward the fire exit. He cleaned methodically, moving through the space with the practiced economy of someone who had been doing this particular job long enough that his body knew the route without instruction. When he reached the bay closest to the Titangent 9, he slowed. The machine occupied the center of the production floor the way a cathedral occupies the center of a small city. Everything around it organized, consciously or not, in relation to it. It was a rotary compression turbine used in large-scale industrial manufacturing, tall enough that the upper housing disappeared into the overhead rigging. When viewed from ground level, its control panels arranged along the eastern face in 3 vertical columns of amber and green indicators. The machine had been running smoothly for the past 4 years. That morning, under the full lights of the production floor, every indicator on every panel was dark. Jonathan stood with his mop in one hand and looked at the eastern face of the machine. Then he moved his gaze to the back, to the narrow channel between the thermal shielding plates and the secondary air duct housing, a space roughly the width of a man's hand. He stood there for 3 full seconds before turning his cart around and continuing down the corridor. Oliver was watching him from the security desk at the far end of the hall. "You're looking at it again," Oliver said when Jonathan passed. Jonathan didn't answer. But Oliver had known him long enough to understand that silence, in Jonathan Hargrove's particular vocabulary, was not the same as denial. The alarm came at 9:17. 3 tones through the building-wide intercom system, the kind that made people stop mid-sentence in every corridor and every office and look up at the ceiling as if the ceiling might clarify what was happening. On the production floor, the TIE Tangent 9 had stopped mid-cycle halted during the third compression sequence, with its internal pressure differential still unresolved, a condition that locked every downstream system on the same circuit. The control panels displayed a single error code, in red, ER9.Delta. The code appeared in none of the operational manuals distributed to the maintenance department. The code appeared in none of the technical bulletins issued by the original equipment supplier. It appeared on the screen and offered no additional explanation, like a locked door with no keyhole visible from the outside. Edward Crane was in the building within 11 minutes of the alarm. He was the chief operating officer of Caldwell Industries and had been for 6 years, a position he occupied with the kind of authority that requires constant maintenance, a voice pitched just low enough to signal control, a habit of arriving slightly after the panic had set in, so that his entrance carried the weight of resolution. He walked onto the production floor, assessed the situation in under a minute, and turned to the head of internal maintenance with both hands in his pockets. "How long?" he said. "We don't know yet. The error code isn't." "I didn't ask about error codes. I asked how long before it runs." The maintenance chief, a careful man named Dennis, looked at the machine and then at the floor. "We're going to need outside help." "Then get it," Crane said. He pulled out his phone and walked toward the corner of the floor where the signal was better. The investors, a delegation from Meridian Capital, the group considering a $600 million acquisition of Caldwell's northern manufacturing assets, were scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock that afternoon for a site inspection. The TIE Tangent 9 was the centerpiece of the tour. It needed to be running. Scarlett Voss heard about the stoppage before she reached her office. She was Caldwell's chief executive officer, and unlike Crane, she did not arrive at the scene with her hands in her pockets. She arrived with a yellow legal pad and a question. "Has anyone pulled the original equipment documentation?" Dennis said they were working on it. Scarlett looked at the dark panels of the TIE Tangent 9 for a long moment, then wrote something on her pad, tore the sheet off, and handed it to her assistant. "Get me everything in the purchase archive. The original design specs, the acquisition contracts, the patent filing history, everything." She was about to turn back toward the elevator when she caught, at the edge of her peripheral vision, a green uniform disappearing around the corner of the far corridor. She registered it without particular attention. Then she went upstairs. By 11 o'clock, the production floor had transformed. Crane had reached 5 external contractors in under 2 hours. The machine's original manufacturer, a Stuttgart-based engineering firm, had dispatched a team of 12 specialists who were now on a transatlantic flight. 23 additional consultants, sourced from 2 industrial automation firms, with whom Caldwell held service contracts, arrived by midday in rental cars, their equipment cases stacked near the main entrance. By 1 o'clock, the floor was occupied by 50 engineers and technicians working in overlapping clusters, their laptops open, their diagnostic devices connected to every accessible port on the TIE Tangent 9's external housing. The first theory of fault in the secondary pressure valve assembly was eliminated by 11:45. The second theory, a software error in the programmable logic controller, was eliminated by 12:30. The third theory, sensor degradation in the compression chamber thermal array, was eliminated by 1:15, 23 minutes before the Meridian Capital delegation was scheduled to walk through the front door. Crane stood in the middle of the floor and looked at the machine as though he could intimidate it into compliance. His phone had rung 4 times in the last hour. He had answered it each time in the same low, controlled voice, and had not provided any information that could be considered reassuring. Jonathan pushed his cart through the perimeter of the crowd, collecting discarded coffee cups and the plastic wrappers from the equipment cases. No one made room for him deliberately. He moved through the spaces between people, the way water moves through a room that hasn't flooded yet. He passed close to the TIE Tangent 9's eastern face and continued without stopping. Mia found him near Bay 4. She had slipped away from the security desk with her notebook under her arm and biscuit in the crook of her elbow, and she walked to her father with the purposeful, unhurried stride of a child who has never once questioned whether she would be welcomed. Oliver appeared in the corridor behind her, mouthing an apology in Jonathan's direction. "Daddy," Mia said, "is the machine sick?" Several of the engineers nearby looked up. One of them smiled briefly and went back to his screen. Crane, who was standing perhaps 15 feet away, turned his head at the sound of her voice. His expression registered the presence of a child on the production floor as a category error, something that should not exist in this context, and therefore warranted no further attention. He turned back to the nearest technical display. Scarlett, who had come back down to the floor 6 minutes earlier with her legal pad and no visible progress on the documentation request, was standing near the north wall when Mia spoke. She looked at the little girl with her faded rabbit and her notebook, and she looked at Jonathan crouching down to the child's level, and she watched. "Yeah," Jonathan said quietly. "She's sick. Can you fix her?" Mia said. Jonathan adjusted the collar of Mia's jacket. He looked over her head at the machine for a moment, a long, quiet look, the kind of look that holds something back. "Let's get you back to Oliver," he said. He stood, took Mia's hand, and walked her to the security desk. Before he turned back toward the floor, he stopped in the corridor and stood still for a moment, looking at a laminated system schematic mounted on the wall beside the break room door. The schematic was a simplified overview of the Titangent 9's hydraulic and pneumatic systems, posted for reference during emergency protocols. Jonathan's eyes moved to a single junction point on the diagram where the secondary pressure balance valve connected to the resonant sensor array on the back side of the machine, behind the thermal shielding plates, in the narrow channel that no one on the floor had thought to access. Mia, already seated again with Oliver's granola bar, watched her father look at the diagram. She opened her notebook and began to draw. The overnight hours were long and unkind to everyone in the building who had a stake in the outcome. The Meridian delegation had arrived at 2 o'clock as scheduled, walked through the facility behind Crane's practiced narration of Caldwell's operational history, and reached the production floor to find 50 engineers standing around a machine that was not running. The lead investor, a gray-haired man named Mr. Alderman who asked questions slowly and listened without moving, had looked at the Titangent 9 for a full minute before asking how long the repair was expected to take. Crane had said they expected resolution by morning. That was 17 hours ago. By 6 in the morning of the second day, 2 of the Stuttgart team had returned to Germany without having identified the fault. A third-party diagnostic software package, the kind billed at $20,000 an hour, had been deployed and returned results that contradicted the Titangent 9's own internal sensors. The conference room on the 3rd floor was papered with printouts. The floor was littered with the evidence of organized, sustained effort. Empty cups, scribbled notes, cable management tape pulled and repositioned a dozen times. Somewhere in the industrial logic of this machine, something was wrong, and 50 of the most qualified engineers in this industry could not locate it. Scarlett stood at the whiteboard in the conference room and looked at a diagram of the machine's internal architecture. She asked a question she had been holding for hours. "Are we certain this isn't an original design fault?" The technical lead from the Stuttgart team, a meticulous man named Franz, who had flown back specifically to consult on this point, paused before answering. "It is possible," he said. "The error code itself is unusual. It doesn't appear in any documentation we issued with the machine." Edward Crane, standing at the back of the room with his arms folded, said, "If you want to start questioning the acquisition decision, Scarlett, that conversation probably should have happened 6 years ago, before we spent $400 million on the line." Scarlett looked at him for a moment, not with anger, with the kind of measured, careful attention that precedes a conclusion. She wrote 2 words on the whiteboard and underlined them: original documentation. Then she went back to her phone. Jonathan ate lunch at a small table near the window of the break room, Mia across from him with her thermos and her notebook. She had been drawing the Titangent 9 from various angles, working from memory, and the results were recognizable in the way children's drawings of complicated things often are, the essential shape captured correctly, the details inventive. In the most recent version, the machine had a small face visible somewhere near the upper housing. It did not look mean. It looked confused. "Why can't they fix it?" Mia asked, tearing her sandwich into fourths. Jonathan looked out the window at the parking lot, where 3 more consultant vans had arrived that morning. "They're looking at too many things," he said, "but they're not listening. Mia tilted her head. Listening to the machine? Yeah. Does the machine talk? Jonathan looked at his daughter. There was a pause in which the break room was quiet enough that you could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Not in words, he said. But if something's wrong, and you know where to be quiet, you can usually tell where it hurts. Mia considered this with the gravity she gave all complicated information. Then she nodded once, as if filing it away, and went back to her sandwich. The afternoon of the second day brought the kind of atmosphere that follows sustained failure. Not despair exactly, but the exhausted, fractious silence of people who have run out of new ideas and are beginning to repeat old ones with diminishing conviction. Edward Crane had stationed himself near the TI-Tangent 9's main control panel, receiving updates from the remaining engineers, in short, low exchanges. The machine stood, as it had stood for nearly 40 hours now, dark, still, indifferent. Jonathan came through the floor on his late afternoon rounds. He moved through the diminished crowd, 20 engineers now, the rest having retreated to the conference room or the corridor, collecting the accumulated waste of another long day. He reached the southern perimeter of the machine and slowed, the way he always slowed near the TI-Tangent 9. A half-step reduction in pace so subtle that no one who wasn't watching for it would notice. This time, he did not keep walking. He set his cart aside, positioning it against the wall in a way that was neither conspicuous nor hidden. He moved to the back of the machine, to the narrow channel between the thermal shielding plates and the secondary air duct housing. The channel was roughly 14 inches wide at its broadest point. The interior was dark, the components densely packed, the visible surfaces warm to the touch from the residual heat of the machine's last operational cycle. In the lowest section of this channel, recessed behind the mounting bracket of the resonance sensor array, there was a small circular fitting, approximately the size of a large coin. It had no label. It did not appear in the laminated operational manual attached to the machine's eastern face. It appeared only in one document in existence, a document currently sitting in a file in Scarlett Voss's archive request, which her assistant had still not been able to locate. Jonathan reached in. He found the fitting by touch without looking. His thumb pressed against the surface, registered the resistance, and applied steady downward pressure. He held it. 1 second. 2. 3. The TI-Tangent 9's pressure equalization sequence initiated from inside the machine, with a sound like a long exhale, a low, resonant release that moved through the floor beneath everyone's feet before it registered as sound in the air. The valve train opened in sequence, each stage clicking into position with a precision that the diagnostic software had spent 48 hours trying to recreate through external intervention. The control panels on the eastern face came alive, amber first, then a cascade of green from the bottom of each column to the top. The main drive assembly engaged. The compression chamber began its warm-up cycle. The TI-Tangent 9 was running. 50 engineers, 20 of them still present on the floor. The others scattered through the building went completely still. The silence lasted 4 seconds, maybe 5. Long enough for everyone present to register what had happened before anyone managed a response. A young engineer near the northern monitoring station looked at his screen, looked at the machine, looked at his screen again, and opened his mouth without producing a sound. The technical lead from Stuttgart, who had flown back from Germany for this, stood with his hands at his sides and stared at the back channel of the machine, where Jonathan's arm was still just withdrawing. Dennis, the maintenance chief, looked at the readouts on the control panel with the expression of a man who has been searching for something in his house for 3 days and just found it in the first place he should have looked. And then Mia ran in. She had heard the machine from the corridor, the change in the building's acoustic signature, the low vibration that moved through the walls and floors, and told anyone who paid attention that something large had started moving again. She ran past Oliver, who tried and failed to catch her arm, and came onto the production floor with her notebook clutched to her chest and biscuit swinging from her hand, and she looked at the TI-Tangent 9 running in full operational cycle, lights green across every panel, and she said, "Daddy fixed it." Her voice was clear and bright in the stunned quiet of the floor, and it hit every person in that room differently. The young engineer near the monitoring station made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. Dennis put one hand flat on the control panel as if steadying himself. Scarlett, who had come down from the third floor 7 minutes earlier and was standing near the north wall with her legal pad and her unanswered documentation request, looked at Jonathan Hargrove for the first time with complete, unfiltered attention. Edward Crane looked at him too. Crane's expression was not relief. It was not gratitude. It was the expression of a man who has, in the span of 5 seconds, understood something very bad about his own position and who is already deciding how to manage it. The machine self-corrected, Crane said. His voice was at its most controlled, which meant it was dangerous. He looked at the engineers around him. Thermal cycle recovery. It happens with high-load equipment after extended shutdowns. Nothing more than that. The young engineer near the monitoring station opened his mouth. Crane's gaze moved to him. The engineer closed his mouth. Dennis was looking at the data log on the control panel. The log showed, with machine precision, a timestamp. The manual pressure reset had been initiated at 3:47 and 12 seconds on the second afternoon. The timestamp did not care about Crane's interpretation. It simply recorded what had happened and when, and by implication, how. Dennis looked at the log for a long moment. He did not look at Crane. He pulled out his notebook and wrote the timestamp down. Crane turned to the nearest security personnel and said Jonathan needed to be escorted from the technical area. He violated the restricted zone, Crane said, loudly enough that the engineers still present could hear it clearly. I don't know what this man thinks he accomplished, but custodial staff do not repair industrial turbine equipment. Whatever happened here, it was not him. Oliver Reed, who had come to the edge of the floor searching for Mia, heard this from the corridor. His face went dark red. He looked at Jonathan, who met his eyes and shook his head slightly. Jonathan picked up his mop handle. He didn't argue. He didn't look at Crane again. He turned to Mia, who was watching from just inside the door, with an expression that was not anger, exactly, but something quieter and more permanent, the look of a child who is storing this memory carefully, because she understands it will matter later. Jonathan reached for her hand, and she took it without being asked, and they walked toward the corridor together. As they passed through the doorway, Mia turned back once and looked at the Titangent 9 in full operation, the lights green, the cycle running, the whole machine moving in the rhythm it was built to keep, and she said to her father, not quietly, in the tone she used when she was making a formal observation, "The machine says thank you, doesn't it?" Jonathan looked down at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I think it does." Scarlett heard both of those sentences. She stood at the door of the corridor and watched them walk away. The little girl with the rabbit and the notebook, the man in the green uniform with the worn hands and the unremarkable face, and she felt the particular sensation of understanding arriving before you have all the information, the recognition of a shape before the full picture has developed. She went back to the third floor and called her assistant. "The archive request," she said. "The original purchase documentation for the Titangent 9. I need it on my desk in 20 minutes. Not a summary. The whole file." It was 26 minutes before her assistant appeared in her office doorway holding a manila folder that had clearly been pulled from deep physical storage, the kind of file that holds paper documents printed before everything, migrated to servers, stapled and annotated in the margins with handwriting that had dried a decade ago. Scarlett opened it on her desk and found, behind the acquisition contract and the insurance appraisal, a set of technical drawings, produced in the fall of 2016. The company named on the drawings was Hargrove Dynamics. The lead design engineer, credited on every sheet, responsible for the complete pneumatic pressure balance system and the resonance sensor architecture, was named in full at the bottom of each page. Jonathan A. Hargrove. Scarlett sat back in her chair and did not move for a long moment. She turned to the second section of the file, found the specifications for the emergency manual pressure reset fitting the small circular device in the back channel of the machine, the one with no operational label, the one present in no manual currently held by any member of Caldwell's maintenance department. The specification note, written in the careful technical language of an engineer, explaining his reasoning to future readers, said, "This fitting is intentionally undocumented in commercial operational materials. It requires direct manual activation, by a person with system-level knowledge of the pressure balance architecture. It exists as a final failsafe for the specific fault condition designated air NIN T delta, which cannot be resolved by external diagnostic intervention. The code is embedded in the base firmware as an indicator of this exact scenario. Scarlett turned to the third section of the file and found a note attached to the acquisition agreement. The note was dated 2018, the year Hargrove Dynamics had been absorbed into a larger holding company during a restructuring that Jonathan, recently widowed and the sole parent of a 3-year-old, had lacked both the legal resources and the emotional bandwidth to contest. He had walked away from the company he had built, from the designs he had created, from a machine he had engineered to be almost impossible to break and impossible to fix without him. He had taken his daughter and gone. She found him in the back parking lot. He was sitting on a wooden shipping platform with Mia beside him, the two of them eating sandwiches from paper bags, biscuit propped against Mia's knee. The lot was quiet in the late afternoon. Inside, 48 hours of crisis had resolved into 1 second of action, and the building was loud with the particular energy of relief and confusion. Out here, Jonathan and Mia sat in the gray light and ate in companionable silence, as if the day had been unremarkable. Scarlett walked out with the folder and stopped in front of them. She set the folder on the wooden platform beside Jonathan without speaking. He looked at it. He looked at his name on the first visible page. He looked at it the way you look at something you haven't seen in a long time. Not with longing, and not without it, but with the particular restraint of someone who made a decision years ago and has not unmade it. "Why didn't you say anything?" Scarlett asked. Jonathan took a slow breath. He looked at Mia, who was offering a piece of her bread to Biscuit with careful ceremony. "Say anything to who?" he said. "And to what end? So people would know who you are." He was quiet for a moment. "Mia knows who I am," he said. "That covers it." Scarlett stood there in the parking lot air and looked at this man, at the worn uniform, at the hands that had built one of the most complex machines in her facility, at the girl beside him, who had drawn that machine from memory, with perfect structural instinct, and she thought of all the people inside who had spent 2 days and 50 engineers on a problem that required 1 person and 1 second, and how that 1 person had been moving through the building the entire time, invisible, because he wore the wrong clothes. Inside the building, the hour that followed was not loud, but it was consequential. Scarlett brought the file into the final session of the Meridian delegation. She didn't present it as an exposé. She presented it as a response to the delegation's outstanding technical inquiry, specifically the question their lead engineer had raised about the long-term serviceability of the Titangent 9 and Caldwell's internal capacity to maintain it without manufacturer support. When she named Jonathan Hargrove as the original lead design engineer, the delegation's senior technical advisor stood up from his chair. He recognized the name. He had used a research paper Jonathan published in 2015 as a reference document in his own graduate thesis. He asked, with precise technical language, whether Mr. Hargrove was available for consultation on the machine's maintenance architecture going forward. Scarlett said she was working on that. It was the documentation audit that followed over the next 3 days that fully exposed what Crane had done, or rather, what he had failed to do, which in matters of $400 million machinery amounted to the same thing. In 2021, Crane had authorized a documentation consolidation, a cost reduction measure that had stripped the Titangent 9's operational files of all components deemed redundant to routine maintenance. The emergency manual reset procedure had been classified as redundant. The ERNITN 9T Delta code notation had been classified as redundant. 6 pages of Jonathan's original design specifications, including the back channel fitting and its activation protocol, had been removed from every version of the manual distributed to maintenance staff. Crane had not done this maliciously. He had done it the way many consequential mistakes are made, with the confidence of a man who assumed he understood something he hadn't fully read. The result was a machine that no one in the building knew how to fix except the man who built it and who had not been asked, because the man who built it was wearing a custodial uniform and pushing a mop through the corridors. Crane left the facility that evening with a letter requesting his voluntary leave of absence pending a full operational audit. He carried it out in a manila folder without acknowledging anyone in the lobby. He did not speak to Jonathan on his way out, because Jonathan was not in the lobby. Jonathan was in the back parking lot again, because it was 3:15 and Mia's school day ended at 3:30. He was reaching for his car keys when he heard footsteps on the asphalt behind him. Scarlett stopped a few feet away. She was not carrying the folder this time. She had her hands in the pockets of her jacket, which she had not been wearing all day, which meant she had gone upstairs to get it before coming outside, which meant this was deliberate. "I'd like to propose something," she said. Jonathan looked at her with his car keys in his hand. "Independent technical advisor. You'd work directly with the engineering team on system architecture and long-term maintenance planning. Not just the Titangent 9, any system in this facility where original design knowledge is relevant." She paused. "I'm not making this offer because of today. I'm making it because I can't afford another 48 hours. Jonathan considered this for a moment. "I need to leave at 3 every day. Fina, and I won't wear a suit." Scarlett looked at the green custodial uniform. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same general region of the face. "Negotiable," she said. Mia appeared from around the corner of the building at that precise moment, moving fast, her notebook bouncing against her side, Biscuit gripped by one ear. She had come with Oliver from the security entrance and spotted her father across the lot and taken the shortest available path to him, which happened to pass directly through the middle of their conversation. She skidded to a halt between the two adults and looked up at Scarlett with the direct, unself-conscious appraisal that belongs only to very young children and a certain type of very old person. "You're the one from the building," Mia said. "I am," Scarlett said. "You have red hair." "I do." Mia considered this. Then she opened her notebook to the page she had been working on and held it up for Scarlett to examine. It was the Titangent 9, drawn with the same structural accuracy as all her machine drawings, green lights on every panel. Beside the machine stood two figures, a tall one with dark hair and a slightly shorter one with a mass of curly lines on top that appeared to represent the color of Scarlett's hair with some interpretive latitude. Below the drawing, in the careful, slightly tilted handwriting of a child who was still learning that letters preferred to be vertical, Mia had written, "Daddy fixed it. The lady helped." Scarlett looked at the drawing for a long moment. She looked at Mia. She looked at Jonathan. Something passed across her face that was not a professional expression, something quieter than that, and more unguarded, the kind of thing that appears on a person's face when they are not managing their impression, but simply responding to something that has reached them. "That's a very good drawing," Scarlett said. Mia nodded, confirming this assessment as accurate. Then she turned to Jonathan and said, at a volume she apparently believed was confidential, "Daddy, does she smell like flowers?" Jonathan coughed. Scarlett crouched down to Mia's level. She did this without hesitation, without the careful self-consciousness of adults who are not accustomed to children, and she said with complete seriousness, "Lavender. Can you smell it?" Mia leaned slightly forward, considered, and then gave a single decisive nod. "Yes," she said. "I like it." She turned immediately back to her notebook and began a new drawing, already deeply absorbed. Jonathan looked at Scarlett over the top of his daughter's head. It was a brief look, a few seconds at most, but it had in it the quality of something being said without the complication of words, which is often the clearest way to say a difficult thing. 2 weeks passed. On the first morning of the third week, Jonathan Hargrove walked through the east entrance of Caldwell Industries at 7:15 and presented his badge at the main desk. The badge was a different color than it had been on every previous morning of his employment here. The receptionist looked at it, looked at him, and said, "Good morning." He said good morning back. He was wearing a white Oxford shirt, sleeves folded to the elbow. His hands still had the calluses in the same places. His hair was the same. He moved through the lobby with the same unhurried economy. On the surface, very little had changed. He walked through the main corridor to the production floor and pushed open the door to the floor where the Titangent 9 stood in full operational cycle, running the way it had been built to run, everything green across every panel. He walked to the back of the machine to the narrow channel between the thermal plates and the secondary air duct, and placed one hand flat against the machine's housing. He held it there for a moment, the way you would rest your hand on the shoulder of something that had been through a lot and was still standing. Then he straightened up and walked back toward the east corridor. Oliver Reed was at the interior entrance to the production floor, where he had been repositioned as part of a general staffing adjustment following Crane's departure. He watched Jonathan cross the floor, and when Jonathan reached the door, Oliver raised one thumb in the air. Jonathan nodded back. Scarlett was in the corridor, coming from the direction of the main conference room, a folder under one arm, reading something on her phone with enough attention that she didn't notice him at first. When she looked up, she stopped. They were about 12 feet apart. The corridor was empty, except for the two of them, and the sound of the facility running steadily on every floor above and below. She looked at the badge, at the shirt, at the hands. "First official day," she said. "Yeah," he said. There was a pause of the kind that tends to appear between two people who have said the most important things already and are not yet certain what comes after them. Scarlett looked as if she was going to add something, then appeared to reconsider. Jonathan looked toward the window that faced the production floor toward the Titangent 9, visible through the glass, running its cycle with the patience of something that has been built to last. He checked his watch. 3 o'clock was still hours away. But he thought of Mia at her desk in school at this moment, Biscuit waiting in her backpack, her notebook open to whatever she was drawing today, some machine, some imaginary creature, some careful record of the world, as she received it. He thought of her voice carrying across the production floor in the stunned silence after the machine came back to life. He thought of how she had held his hand when they walked out, and how that handhold had felt the same as every other, as all the other mornings and all the other ordinary moments that had held everything in place through years of loss and invisibility and the particular quiet dignity of a man who had stopped needing the world to recognize him in order to remain exactly who he was. The Titangent 9 ran on behind the glass. It did not know the name of the man who had built it. It did not know the name of the man who had saved it. It only knew in the way that machines know things, through pressure and calibration and the correct alignment of parts that it was running, when 48 hours ago it had been silent. Some things only need one person who knows where to press. Some people only need one reason to keep showing up. And some stories end not with noise, but with the sound of something large and important doing exactly what it was made to do, while the man who made it possible checks his watch and thinks about 3 o'clock. Hebely Herve, end of 6t. Tibeli, end of script. 58. Estimated word count, 5,540 words.